Germany should have stopped the invasion because by June 1944, the Wehrmacht had nearly 60 divisions stationed in France, 6 million mines planted on the beaches, and months of warning that an Allied attack was imminent. Along the Western European coastline, the Atlantic Wall stretched 2,400 miles from Norway to the Spanish border. For years, Nazi propaganda had declared this defensive line impenetrable, and German commanders expected it to hold long enough to mount a decisive counterattack. Yet within hours on June 6, 1944, those defenses crumbled. Across 5 beaches in Normandy, over 150,000 Allied soldiers poured ashore, and by nightfall, they had secured a foothold that would never be dislodged. Most historical accounts credit this victory to Allied advantages: meticulous planning, superior resources, and the bravery of soldiers charging into machine gun fire. But these explanations overlook the real reason Germany lost on D-Day. Because before the invasion even began, the German military was already collapsing from within. By the spring of 1944, fuel shortages had grounded the Luftwaffe and stranded panzer divisions across France. Meanwhile, command disputes between Rommel and the High Command had scattered armored reserves with no unified defensive plan, even as Allied deception operations convinced Hitler that Normandy was merely a feint and that the real assault would come at Calais. And on the morning of June 6th, the Führer slept past 10 o'clock while his generals waited for permission to release the panzer reserves. Germany's defeat resulted from failures that accumulated over months and collapsed in a matter of hours. What follows reveals how outdated defensive assumptions, crippling supply shortages, divided leadership, and catastrophic delays combined to produce one of history's most decisive military disasters. Section 1. The Atlantic Wall Illusion. The Atlantic Wall's failure began with a single flawed assumption. German planners believed that any Allied invasion would need to capture a major port to succeed. Without a functioning harbor, they reasoned, the Allies could never unload the tanks, trucks, and supplies required for a full-scale attack. As a result, the Wehrmacht concentrated its strongest defenses around established ports like Calais, Boulogne, and Cherbourg. This decision left other stretches of coastline, including the beaches of Normandy, far less protected. The irony would prove fatal. The beaches Germany fortified most heavily were not the ones the Allies intended to attack. Around Calais, 3 massive gun batteries with 406mm cannons pointed directly at England. In Normandy, one defensive sector covering the British and Canadian landing beaches had just 25 guns. The disparity was not a matter of strategic choice, but of chronic shortfalls in materials and manpower. These gaps existed because construction had fallen far behind schedule. The Nazi leadership had demanded 15,000 fortifications and bunkers along the coast, but the construction organization could deliver only about 6,000. Workers were spread impossibly thin, with just 1 laborer for every 7 meters of coastline, compared to 1 per meter on the Reich's west wall along its own borders. The situation on the Cotentin Peninsula illustrated the problem clearly. At Utah Beach, where American troops would eventually land, only one of 42 planned strongpoints was actually finished by June 1944. As historian Stephen Zaloga has documented, fortification work on the D-Day beaches was almost non-existent by December 1943, just 6 months before the invasion. The construction that did occur started late and remained incomplete when the Allies arrived. Even senior German commanders recognized the truth. The Atlantic Wall was more propaganda than reality. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, the overall commander in the West, called the Atlantic Wall sheer humbug. According to Rundstedt, at best, the fortifications could delay the enemy for just 24 hours. Admiral Friedrich Ruge, who served as Rommel's naval advisor, was equally blunt. The wall, so highly praised by the propaganda, existed in harsh reality only in a few places. Meanwhile, the Führer believed his fortifications would hold for a month or more, but his own commanders knew better. The defenses that did exist suffered from serious deficiencies. Throughout the coastal sectors, many units relied on horse-drawn wagons instead of trucks because motorized vehicles were in critically short supply. Static fortress divisions remained stuck in their bunkers and could do nothing more than hold their positions. In open combat, these units would be cut to pieces. Additionally, some German officers were so eager to impress Field Marshal Rommel during inspections that they marked out fake minefields, assuming he would not investigate too closely to discover they were fictitious. Meanwhile, the Allies had solved the port problem. They had developed a solution the Germans never anticipated, one that would make the entire port-based strategy worthless. In secret, Allied engineers had constructed prefabricated floating dock sections. These components would be towed across the English Channel and assembled into two giant temporary harbors, codenamed Mulberries. Through these artificial ports, the Allies would eventually land 2.5 million men and 500,000 vehicles, all without capturing a single German-held harbor. The core assumption that had shaped German defensive planning proved entirely wrong. The Atlantic Wall was meant to stop the invasion cold. Instead, many defenses were overcome within hours, some in mere minutes, while others held out longer. But none could prevent the Allies from breaking through. But Germany's problems ran deeper than outdated defenses. Behind that wall, the German war machine was running on empty, starved of the fuel and supplies it desperately needed. And that crisis would undermine everything that came next. Section 2. The Crippling Shortages. By the spring of 1944, Germany faced a hidden crisis that would doom its defense of France. It was running out of fuel. For months, the American 8th Air Force had been destroying German oil plants and refineries. These bombing raids devastated production, and as a result, the Wehrmacht became desperately short of fuel for tanks, trucks, and aircraft. This shortage affected every aspect of military operations. Panzer divisions could not respond quickly because they lacked the fuel to move, and even when they did, tank tracks had limited mileage that wore down with every unnecessary movement. Meanwhile, the rubber shortage made truck tires vulnerable to punctures. When tanks did move, crews sometimes abandoned them not because of battle damage, but because they simply ran dry. In one telling example, 2 tanks were sent into a counterattack with only 8 artillery shells in one tank and a single shell in the other. The fuel crisis had become a supply crisis that paralyzed combat operations. The shortage also grounded the Luftwaffe. Pilots needed fuel for training flights, but there was not enough to go around. While Allied pilots received 180 or more hours of training, German trainees got just 60 hours. For this reason, inexperienced pilots were shot down at alarming rates. In early 1944, the Luftwaffe was losing 400 pilots per month, and pilot life expectancy had dropped to less than 30 days. On D-Day itself, the contrast was staggering. Allied aircraft flew over 14,000 sorties, while the Luftwaffe managed just 319. Not a single Allied plane was lost to German fighters that day. All 113 Allied aircraft losses came from anti-aircraft fire. As historian Richard Hargreaves has documented, the Luftwaffe could muster only 60 to 80 fighters daily from its 3rd Air Fleet. Of nearly 1,000 frontline aircraft on paper, only 139 fighters and 185 bombers were actually operational. German soldiers felt the Luftwaffe's absence immediately. Without air cover, they faced constant attacks from Allied aircraft that operated with complete freedom over the battlefield. Road movement, whether by day or night, became extremely dangerous. Allied fighters would attack even a single vehicle or motorcycle. One report described the effect on German troops as paralyzing. Soldiers entered combat in low spirits, knowing that any movement could draw fire from above. The supply problems extended beyond fuel. Allied bombing had wrecked rail lines and roads throughout France, which meant that artillery batteries were sometimes rationed to just 3 rounds per day. Soldiers went hungry because supply trucks could not get through, and in some sectors, entire units went without food for days. One German officer later admitted that the Allies had destroyed most of their petrol and oil dumps, so there was no future in continuing to fight. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel saw the disaster coming, and his warning in May 1944 proved prophetic. During a conversation with General Bayerlin, Rommel predicted that they would undergo the same experience with supplies in the invasion battle as they had in North Africa. Rommel warned that the supply lines would be destroyed, leaving German forces unable to transport materials across the Rhine, just as they had failed to move supplies across the Mediterranean. He understood that Allied air power would cut off German logistics, and his prediction came true within weeks. By June 1944, the German war machine had become a hollow shell, starved of the resources it needed to fight. However, even if Germany had possessed all the fuel in the world, it faced another devastating problem. Throughout the spring of 1944, its commanders had been locked in a bitter dispute over how to defend against the invasion, and that disagreement would prove fatal. Section 3. The Clashing Commanders. The dispute centered on a single tactical question: where should Germany position its tanks? Field Marshal Erwin Rommel commanded Army Group B defending northern France, and his experience fighting the British and Americans in North Africa had taught him a painful lesson. Allied air power could destroy any force caught in the open, and he was absolutely certain that German tanks held back from the coast would never reach the battle in time. Rommel believed that the war would be won or lost on the beaches, and that the first 24 hours of the invasion would be decisive. Because of this, he wanted the panzer divisions positioned right at the coast, ready to strike the Allied troops the moment they landed. However, other generals disagreed completely, and this disagreement would paralyze the German response when the invasion came. General Leo Geyer von Schweppenburg commanded the panzer forces in the west, and together with the legendary tank theorist Heinz Guderian, he argued for a different approach. They wanted to hold the panzers back in forests north of Paris and then unleash them in one massive counterstroke that would drive the Allies back into the sea. Both strategies had merit, but neither would work without full commitment to one approach or the other. On the other hand, Field Marshal von Rundstedt, the overall commander in the West, stayed above the fight. He had grown cynical and tired over the course of the war. As historian Antony Beevor noted, his dismay over the Führer's conduct of military operations had made him passive, and he showed little interest in resolving the debate. The command problems ran deeper still. The Nazi leader refused to unify German forces under a single commander, and his constant interference made coordination impossible. The Luftwaffe remained under Hermann Göring's control, and Göring refused to put his anti-aircraft guns at the service of the army. Due to this, the flak batteries that could have helped defend against Allied bombers were not coordinated with ground defense. Göring had over 330,000 ground staff and signals personnel stationed in the West as part of his empire building, but these resources remained unavailable for the actual fighting. In the end, the dictator made a decision that satisfied no one. He split the difference between the two strategies, assigning some panzer divisions to Rommel while keeping others under central control as a strategic reserve. This compromise left the German defense fatally weakened. Rommel received direct command of only 3 panzer divisions, and just one of those was positioned close to the Normandy coast. Worse still, Hitler demanded personal control over the reserves, which meant that no panzer division could move without his explicit approval. Military historian Flint Whitlock described the situation plainly. Rommel was handcuffed with rules that prevented him from moving his armored formations from the interior to Normandy without the Nazi leader's personal approval. Even if Rommel spotted the invasion and knew exactly where to strike, he could not order the tanks forward without first requesting permission from headquarters hundreds of miles away in Bavaria. If the German leadership had adopted Rommel's strategy and positioned the panzers at the coast, the D-Day invasion might have been a disaster for the Allies. Instead, the command structure remained divided, and German forces were out of position when the attack came. Yet, the problems extended beyond internal disputes. While Germany's commanders argued over tank placement, they were also being deceived by one of the most successful deception operations in military history. Section 4. Blinded by deception. The Allies pulled off one of history's greatest deceptions, and Germany fell for it completely. Called Operation Fortitude, the plan aimed to convince the Nazi leadership that the real invasion would come at Pas-de-Calais, the point on the French coast closest to England. To sell this lie, the Allies created an elaborate fake army. Known as the First U.S. Army Group, or FUSAG for short, this phantom force was commanded by Lieutenant General George Patton, the American general the Germans feared most. At its fake headquarters, two fictitious corps maintained constant radio traffic. When German spy planes flew over, they photographed what looked like massive preparations: tanks, aircraft, and landing craft. In total, there were 250 fake landing ships, but none of it was real. The tanks were inflatable decoys, the landing craft were made of canvas, and the radio messages were scripted fiction. The deception went deeper than fake equipment. Nearly every German spy in Britain had been captured and turned into a double agent, feeding the Führer exactly what the Allies wanted him to believe. Under the British XX Committee, this double-cross system operated with remarkable effectiveness. The most valuable agent was a Catalan named Juan Pujol, codenamed Garbo. Over the months leading up to D-Day, he created 27 imaginary sub-agents and sent over 500 radio messages to his Nazi handlers. Every message was carefully crafted fiction designed to reinforce the Calais lie. Meanwhile, codebreakers at Bletchley Park intercepted German communications and confirmed the deception was working. On June 2nd, they reported that the latest evidence suggested the enemy expected the initial landing in Normandy or Brittany, followed by the main effort in Pas-de-Calais. The German leader was fully convinced that any invasion outside of Calais was merely a feint. The deception extended beyond spies and fake armies. On the night of the invasion itself, the Allies would use every trick available to keep the Germans guessing. Operation Copperhead sent an actor who resembled General Montgomery to Gibraltar and Algiers, which suggested Allied plans for the Mediterranean. Another plan hinted at landings in the Bay of Biscay. Military historian Flint Whitlock called Operation Fortitude the real key to success on D-Day, noting that everything worked like clockwork. The deception continued even on the night of the invasion. Hundreds of dummy paratroopers were dropped inland from Normandy, and some were rigged with explosives to simulate gunfire. Additionally, British commandos parachuted in with record players that broadcast the sounds of tanks and artillery. The goal was chaos and confusion, and it worked. German early warning systems also failed completely. Admiral Theodor Kranke was so confident that bad weather made invasion impossible that he canceled all naval patrols on the night of June 5th. The consequences were devastating. The entire Allied invasion fleet, consisting of thousands of ships, crossed the English Channel completely unobserved. When reports of paratroopers and ships finally did arrive, many German commanders dismissed them as distractions because they were so certain the real attack would come at Calais. Even after D-Day began, the dictator remained blind to reality. He still believed Normandy was a trick and that the real invasion was coming at Calais. Consequently, when the real invasion struck, the Germans reacted slowly and blindly, wasting the critical hours that would decide the fate of the entire operation. Section 5. The 4-hour window. The fate of D-Day hung on a few precious hours on the morning of June 6, 1944. This was Germany's window to crush the invasion, and they missed it completely. The problem started at the top. According to historian Antony Beevor, on the night of June 5th, the Führer stayed up late at his mountain retreat in Bavaria. He finally went to bed at 3, and his staff had strict orders not to wake him for any reason. At the same time, Field Marshal Rommel was not even in France. He had left for Germany to celebrate his wife's birthday and to meet with the Nazi leader about getting more panzer divisions, and he would not return until that evening, when it was already too late. Other key commanders were also absent that night. General Edgar Feuchtinger, who commanded the 21st Panzer Division, the only panzer unit close to the invasion beaches, was in Paris with his mistress. When the division received its first reports of paratroopers around 1:20 in the morning, no one with authority was there to give orders. By 2:15 in the morning, General Max Pemsel sounded the alarm and declared that he was convinced the invasion would be upon them by dawn. However, higher headquarters refused to act. Then at 3 in the morning, the elite 12th SS Panzer Division Hitler Youth was ready to roll toward the coast. These were young, motivated soldiers eager to fight, but no order came from higher authorities. Instead, the young soldiers were sent back to their quarters to wait. Around the same time, Rundstedt's headquarters requested permission to release the panzer reserves, but the answer came back: no. The dictator was asleep and no one would wake him. His naval adjutant later explained that there was not much to tell him anyway, and his staff at Berchtesgaden did not think the situation was serious enough to disturb him. As dawn broke, American troops began landing at Utah Beach. Major Werner Pluskat stared at the horizon from his bunker and saw something that shocked him. As historian Richard Hargreaves recorded, Pluskat reported that there must be 10,000 ships out there. His headquarters could not believe it, insisting that the Americans and British did not have that many ships. But they did, and they were landing troops by the thousands. The German leader finally woke up around 10 in the morning, roughly 4 hours after the seaborne landings began. When told about Normandy, his reaction was unexpected. He said with apparent satisfaction that the news could not be better, and that now they had the enemy where they could destroy them. Yet he still did not release the panzers because he still believed Normandy was a distraction. On the ground, German commanders watched in frustration as the roads remained empty. The tanks that should have been racing to the beaches were still waiting for permission to move. Commander Kurt Meyer watched the road from Caen to Falaise at 10 in the morning and noted bitterly that there was no German armor rolling along it. The delays were wasting the precious hours when a counterattack might still succeed. The 21st Panzer Division finally received orders around 6:30 in the morning, 5 hours after the first paratrooper reports. However, new orders soon followed: turn around, go back through Caen, and attack from a different direction. The division had to squeeze through the narrow streets of Caen under constant bombardment, which wasted hours and exposed the tanks to Allied fighter bombers. The division started with 124 tanks, but by the time it reached the fighting that afternoon, only 60 were still working. Still, the tanks would not arrive in time. Not until 2:30 in the afternoon, roughly 8 hours after the first waves hit the beaches, did Hitler finally authorize the release of the panzer reserves. Kurt Zeitzler, the Army Chief of Staff, left the afternoon briefing in disgust. He later remarked that the response was typical. The invasion had begun, and time was critical. Yet headquarters discussed every situation at length rather than rushing officers to the front or giving commanders freedom to act. They waited and hesitated until they missed the right moment to strike back. During the nightfall, over 150,000 Allied troops were ashore in France. The window for driving them back into the sea had closed forever, and Germany's defeat was only beginning to unfold. Section 6. Defeat sealed. By the end of June 6, 1944, Germany's failure was complete. Despite fierce fighting, especially at Omaha Beach where American soldiers faced the strongest German defenses, the Allies had broken through on all 5 landing beaches. Most German strongpoints were overcome in less than 3 hours, and the 716th Infantry Division, which defended much of the British and Canadian sector, effectively ceased to exist as a fighting force. At Omaha, the 352nd Infantry Division lost 1 in 5 men. The truth was that many German units were already hollow shells before the battle began. Years of fighting on the Eastern Front had drained Germany's best soldiers, and the divisions sent to France were filled with whoever was left. The troops defending Normandy included older men, many in their mid-30s, along with veterans still suffering from frostbite or old wounds. Others were teenagers with almost no training. As historian Anthony Beevor noted, one German writer serving as a corporal in France observed that it was really sad to see these children's faces in gray uniforms. Throughout this period, the best recruits were sent to the SS and Luftwaffe paratrooper divisions, which left regular infantry with what remained. General Fritz Bayerlein observed that no good replacements were ever sent to the infantry divisions. Some coastal defense units were even composed of soldiers who had suffered stomach wounds or hearing loss, and these were called ear and stomach battalions. Making matters worse, the Germans had to rely on soldiers who had no loyalty to the Nazi cause. Around 1/5 of the 7th Army consisted of Eastern troops who could barely understand German. These Osttruppen had been recruited from Soviet prisoners of war, and they had volunteered only to escape starvation in inhumane German prison camps. One German general admitted after the war that the Ost Battalion, which had been considered reliable, failed completely. German officers worried about being shot in the back by their own troops once the fighting started, and many Osttruppen deserted at the first opportunity. Some even joined the French resistance. On the other hand, the reinforcements Germany desperately needed could not get through because the French resistance had spent months sabotaging rail lines throughout France. Around the spring of 1944, the resistance numbered around 350,000 members, with about 100,000 having serviceable weapons. The railway workers proved particularly effective at disrupting German logistics. They derailed trains inside tunnels where they were almost impossible to remove, and they targeted heavy lifting cranes as priorities. Workers also wrecked engines in marshalling yards and constantly blew up tracks. On the night before D-Day, the BBC broadcast coded messages that sent resistance fighters into action across France, and 37 railway lines were cut around Dijon alone. The sabotage extended beyond railways. Resistance fighters scattered tacks and broken glass on roads used by supply vehicles, while telephone workers cut underground cables and forced Germans to use radio communications that the Allies could intercept and decode. Several hundred railway workers were killed by the Germans, and another 3,000 were deported to concentration camps. Nevertheless, the sabotage continued. When panzer divisions finally received orders to move toward Normandy, they could not use the rails and had to take back roads instead, which exposed them to constant attack from Allied fighter bombers. A panzer battalion that was supposed to counterattack the Americans at Omaha Beach never arrived at all because fighter bombers trapped it on the roads and destroyed the bridges it needed. The imbalance in the air was overwhelming. The Allies flew over 14,000 sorties on D-Day, while Germany flew just 319. 2 days into the invasion, only 100 German aircraft remained operational, and by the end of June, they were outnumbered 15-1. As Rommel had predicted, once the Allies broke through the thin crust of beach defenses, Germany had nothing in reserve. The counterattacks, when they finally came, were uncoordinated and easily defeated. As night fell on June 6th, nearly 175,000 Allied troops were ashore in France. Allied casualties were fewer than 5,000, far less than the planners had feared, while German losses were at least as heavy. The Allies had secured their foothold, and they would only grow stronger. Within 3 weeks, over 600,000 Allied soldiers would be in France, along with 81,000 vehicles and 183,000 tons of equipment. Germany, in contrast, was disorganized, low on fuel and ammunition, and unable to coordinate any meaningful response. The three-month Normandy campaign would cost Germany nearly 240,000 casualties, with another 200,000 soldiers taken prisoner. The Wehrmacht would never recover. The dictator's dream of throwing the Allies back into the ocean was shattered. Germany now faced a two-front war it could not win. The Red Army was advancing in the east, while the Western Allies were pouring into France. It was only a matter of time. In the end, Germany failed on D-Day not because of one mistake, but because of a perfect storm of failures. An outdated defensive strategy left Normandy's beaches weakly protected. Fuel shortages grounded aircraft and stranded tanks. Clashing commanders left panzer divisions scattered and out of position. Allied deception blinded German intelligence. Hollowed-out divisions filled with unreliable troops crumbled under pressure. And fatal delays at the highest levels wasted the precious hours when a counterattack might still have succeeded. Ultimately, the speed, strength, and coordination that once conquered Europe were gone, replaced by confusion, shortage, and delay. D-Day marked the beginning of the end for the Third Reich. Germany's failure in Normandy was just one of several catastrophic mistakes that doomed the Nazi war effort. To understand the full picture of how the Third Reich collapsed, watch this video next.